questions from board members and from the public, or do you want just questions from board members? Both tonight. Okay, good. So then everybody, it's fair game. Okay, good. So, as he said, I'm the director of the Wisconsin Resource Center for Charter Schools, and I'll just give you my context of what I do first. So I am funded out of a grant that Wisconsin has for 5 years. It's a federal grant that the Department of Public Instruction received to support public charter schools in the state. And so DPI's portion of the grant is to expand and replicate and plan and implement new charter schools throughout the state. And so a lot of their funds is going right to schools, and then they sort of manage that compliance piece. My piece is technical assistance, and so I'm creating resources and going out and supporting authorizers, governance boards, charter school leaders and charter school teachers, and also the community on just anything that they need around charter schools. And so it's kind of a dream job. It's fun. Everything's free. I get to be out there and help people with their design work, and it's been really, really a joy. And I really am all over the state. So our office is in Tomahawk, which is located in CISA 9. I'm at the CISA office, but we're a statewide office, and so I'm kind of here for everybody. So I wanted to show you, we do have charters all over the state. Sometimes people think that it's kind of more in one region or another, but it's really everywhere. We have charters in every single one of the 12 CISAs. Some of them are very, very small. Some of them are very big, and some of them are virtual. Some are bricks and mortar. They kind of run the gamut. And so part of what I think makes charters special is that they do kind of really meet the needs of their community. And so it's fun to see that diversity. And then I should also just say that I'm not a charter school advocate, and so I really want to be here to be thoughtful about what charter schools are and what they're not. And so I don't think every school district should necessarily have charter schools, or that every community should, or maybe some of them it makes sense to have many and some not. So I want to just help you make those decisions for whatever's right for your community. Okay, so charter schools, let's start with the federal definition. They are public, non-sectarian schools, and I emphasize public because all the charter schools are public. Doesn't matter who they're authorized by, they are all public schools. They all have public compliance, public funding, public all the statutes that go along with public schools. There are some waivers, there are some things that make them unique, but they are public schools nonetheless. The way that a charter school is created is through a business-like contract or a charter between a governance board and an authorizing school board or other chartering entity. And we'll get into that a little bit more in a bit, but that's kind of the only thing that all charter schools have in common. They're all public schools, and they all have a contract between a governance board and an authorizer. After that, it's totally up to what is in that contract and what that school wants to be. So some people say, oh, they're all at risk, or they're all for these kids or those kids, or they're virtual, or they're project-based. But no, none of that is true. It's just the only thing they all have in common is this definition. Do we have questions already? I want to make sure I'm not going too fast. With me? Okay. And then this kind of gets into the contract piece. So again, the contract is at the center of it between the governance board and the authorizer. The things that are in that contract are just so important. So the governance board is often asking, especially in a district authorized charter school, they're often asking for autonomies over finances, staffing, curriculum, things like that. They say, here's our vision, we want to be this kind of school, and in order to do that, we need to change these other things, or these things that would make us different from any other school in our community. And so those are the things that they ask for that autonomy on. Same even for a non-district authorized school, they'd be saying, what you typically think of a school, here's how ours would be different. And you really have to define those pieces generally finance staff curriculum, but also schedule. I mean, there's other things that they can include in there, and they do, but we're just trying to kind of simplify. And then in exchange for those autonomies and saying we're going to do these things different, they have to produce results and accountability on finance, academics, and operations. And so that's often what you see outlined in those contracts is here's what the authorizer is giving permission for the governance board and the school to do, and then here's how they'll hold them accountable.
I have a question for on that. So there's a contract by the authorizer, and let's say the authorizer is not the school district here. And who then oversees to make sure that they're meeting their contractual obligations, and what's the penalty if they don't? Or am I getting ahead of you?
No, I mean, I'll probably get into some more of that later too, but so the authorizer is sort of the referee in that contract, although either party, I guess, could say, could call the other one out on not meeting the terms of the contract and walk away. And we've seen both parties break contracts or not renew at certain times, depending on, how that relationship is going and how both parties are sort of upholding their piece. But, I mean, ultimately, the authorizer has to determine if the school is meeting the things, that they were holding them accountable to. Often we see an authorizer give a governance board in a school a corrective action plan if they feel like they're not meeting those things and say, okay, here's your last opportunity to perform, otherwise you're no longer upholding your end of the agreement and we're going to have to close your school. And so that's why you see charter schools close sometimes, because there is that contract in place that's saying either you perform or you don't get to stay open, versus with a public school board, if one of your schools continues to underperform and underperform and underperform, closing that school is generally not the solution that you'd go to, although certainly in some of our rural areas, we do consolidate schools and things like that, not always for underperforming. But I mean, essentially it comes back to the authorizer, so being the school district or being any other authorizing entity, they're the ones who make that decision of, do we keep this school open even if they're underperforming, or do we give them some kind of tools or support or warnings? But I mean, I think, does that get at your question, or you want me to go deeper?
No, you get at it. I just want to make sure that there's something that is in place that says we have eyes on you, because what if the authorizer isn't actually have eyes? And the charter schools, I mean, who actually steps in and says you're doing the job, you're not doing the job?
Do.
Okay, the charter school contract is critical in regard to that question, and because the charter school contract will address things like, how is the school going to protect student rights? And how is the school going to drive student achievement? And how will the school provide information to the authorizer that helps the authorizer understand that the school is being financially responsible and protecting student rights and driving student achievement? And so in the contract negotiation is probably the most critical part of the process. And, so basically, once you have that contract, if the charter school is not meeting its obligations under the contract, then breach of contract. And a well-written charter school contract, and the center has examples, draft contracts for both school districts and 2R and 2X charters. A well-drafted contract will go through the steps for plans of improvement and revocation. So basically, it is breach of contract action, what you're talking about. If they don't do what they promised to do, then you have a contractual grounds to shut it down.
I get that, but what if the authorizer isn't paying attention
Yeah.
And you have a charter school in a community that's, let's say it's failing, but the authorizer isn't really doing their job, how, oh,
Yeah.
you don't have to raise your hand, you just
Well,
click right on
I
in.
didn't, yeah, I wanted you to know.
This isn't
I'm-
school, you know.
I'm with you. So absolutely, I would say that there are some district authorizers more commonly than independent authorizers who sort of, they have the charter school. It's just one more of their schools. Sometimes school report cards come back not looking so hot at some of your schools, right? And do you like immediately take action and shut them down and say they can't be one of our schools anymore? No, you just sort of, you help them, you maybe change some leadership, maybe put some extra performance measures in place. And so, yeah, I mean, sometimes they keep schools open that aren't high-performing charter schools, just like we keep other schools open. And I think with independent authorizers, they have the option to do the same as a school district. Is it super smart? Is it what we recommend? No. I mean, like, if some of our independent authorizers have a whole bunch of low-performing schools, I think most of them kind of know, and they're working on corrective action with those schools. But as an authorizing entity, per the statutes of Wisconsin, they can authorize low-performing schools if they want to. Just like any school district can continue to operate low-performing schools. I mean, they get the flags and the support from DPI and everything, just like every other public school. So there are a bunch of charter schools that have been identified and are under continuous improvement work with DPI and stuff like that. So, I mean, it's similar, but you're right. I mean, I think you noticed a thing that is a concern. I mean, that they absolutely could be a low-performing charter school in your community. Yep, yeah.
DPI still does oversee it, though.
In a contentious issue that comes to the charter school authorizer, could it ultimately resolve in a vote by the charter school authorizing people, or how would a contentious issue be decided?
Yeah, I mean, most of the authorizers have a board, and they vote on annual, like, they have performance measures they check in on every year, and then every 5 years, generally, they have to vote to renew that charter school contract. If it was, like Barry was saying, a breach of contract issue, yeah, potentially would have to come to that authorizing board and, be brought up on the agenda and that sort of thing. Certainly, if it's something illegal, they would need to bring it up and hear it out at a board meeting. But I mean, the authorizers are universities, and so generally the board that's doing the authorizing is either a board of regents or a board put together by the chancellor's office that's more of like an advisory committee. So yes, I mean, there may be a vote, but I wouldn't put a whole lot of emphasis on that it's like this big public meeting, because it generally, at that level, it wouldn't be.
I would think that in a charter school authorizer that is outside of the local board of education, if there is a perceived problem, there could be advocates for and against. Coming from within the board, I would think, and there are advocates and some not. At some point, there's either going to be, in a bad scenario,
Yeah.
at some point, there's either going to be continued frustration or a decision made.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm trying to get at, how would that ultimate decision be made? Because some people are going to be lobbying for a political environment of a perceived charter school that's taking money away from the public school.
So charter schools are public schools. But I hear you. Absolutely, right, from the school district, if it's an outside authorized. I mean, I haven't seen that play out in the way you just described before, so I can't speak from experience, but I think you're right. I mean, it could absolutely become a public concern where people are voicing their opinions for and against, but in terms of it going to a vote, I mean, there's no vote that a school board would have in that situation because they're not involved in that contract. I mean, it really comes down to that contract, and as long as the authorizing entity and the charter school governance board sign that contract and uphold what's in that contract, or work on corrective action, or, work out some agreement where they both want to still continue that contract, the school stays open.
Well, what is the straw that breaks the camel's back then on a marginally performing charter school?
Barry?
That is for the authorizer to decide.
Mm-hmm.
And, well,
Oh.
I take you to attend a lot of school board meetings, you know how school boards make decisions.
Mm-hmm.
They, someone makes a motion, seconds it, there is a vote.
Yeah.
Often that is on the recommendation there's some recommendation of administration. I do not know, and I'm guessing Sarah probably doesn't exactly know, how the Office of Educational Opportunity or any of the 2R authorizers, like the City of Milwaukee or UW-Milwaukee or any of them. I'm not certain how they make those decisions, but Sarah, why don't you talk a little bit about how UW-Milwaukee operates, because you told me they have a pretty refined program.
They do. I mean, they've got really great annual performance measures and annual reports. The schools have to report, through this online system they use. I mean, it's kind of like board docs, where they have like everything you need to provide this, and this on your financials, your academics, and your operational performance, and then all that stuff gets submitted annually, gets reviewed by their advisory council, and then they're kind of put in notice how it's looking for them to be renewed at their 5-year renewals, so that it's all very transparent along the way, how the Office of Charter Schools perceives that they're performing based on all those measures, and then it comes time for renewal and there's no surprises. I mean, it's all very public, it's very transparent. Some of the schools are doing well on certain things, some of them aren't. That's public too. And for them, they do issue corrective action plans when they feel like schools are regularly underperforming in certain ways. But again, it's absolutely up to them what they want to do about it. If they want to keep the school open and continue to fight for them and continue to support them through struggles or not. I think that, I keep coming back to it, but that absolutely happens in our school districts, charter or not. I mean, we support underperforming schools all the time because we believe in them and we know that there's still good things happening and they're still good for communities, even if they're struggling in certain measures. So I think it's really their decision. Kyle, let's go to you and then maybe I'll continue on a few more slides.
So I think we've gotten a little bit closer. I think what Jeff was actually trying to get at is if there was an independently authorized charter school within our district boundaries and it wasn't performing well, then as a board, there's nothing that we can do about it, even though it's within our boundaries.
Right.
Okay, so I just wanted to maybe stop dancing around that a little bit. And
Yeah.
just
I mean,
bounce
I
right
would
on it.
say the only thing you could do is that you could offer to be that school's authorizer because charter school boards can decide to break a contract and authorize with a different authorizer. And so if you felt like you could support that school and kind of help turn them back on track and give them what they needed to be a higher performing school, and you wanted to have those conversations, you absolutely, I mean, there's your vote. Like you could offer to take them back as part of your school district.
And I do have another quick question.
Yeah.
So when the charter schools put out their report cards, so if there's an independent charter within the school district of Beloit that's not authorized by us, but it's within our district boundaries, then how would that show up on WiseDash to find that it wouldn't show up as a school district of Beloit school?
They're their own LEA,
Okay.
they're their own school.
So it would
report
show
card.
up by whatever name of the school that it was named. Okay.
Yep.
I just want to clarify.
Thank you. Yeah, that's helpful. Yeah.
When we go through, when the authorizing board or governance board, or whatever it's called, looks at them, is that information public? like, as a parent, if my
Yeah.
child was in the charter school.
Yeah.
You know, there's place where public is great and whatnot. But is there also gonna be like, you know, if there's action or this and that, as a parent, I'd be able to monitor?
Yes.
Stay on top of it.
Yeah, so the annual reports, you know, should all be public. Oftentimes, you know, the schools and authorizer are really overly transparent, you know, posting all that stuff, sending it out to families, you know, making it available on websites and things like that. If there's a corrective action plan, I know the UW system authorizer, they had the school post it on the front of their website saying, you know, we're currently working with our authorizer on these corrective actions, just so that the families did know that stuff was being worked on. But I think, yeah, I mean, the contracts are public. I'm trying to think what else you would need. You know, the meetings are, yeah, governance board meetings are all open meetings. And when they report their annual report to the authorizer, that's the meeting, I guess. Would a Board of Regents meeting be open? Well, like at the annual, when they'd annually report? I don't know if Board of, they might be. Yeah, but at the very least, the governance board meetings are all open, so you'd always be able to go, and those are generally monthly, you know, and all their agendas and meeting minutes are posted and everything. So I think you'd have what you need. Okay, so let me continue on a few more slides, and we can do another round of questions. So I think we kind of got at this. The role of a charter school authorizer is to solicit and approve applications for charter schools under their oversight. Now, some authorizers choose not to approve applications, but every school district in Wisconsin, every public university is listed in the statutes, and there's a few extra ones. I've got it on my next slide. So they all can review applicants, and they can put out, here are the terms that we would like to seek applicants. You can say, we as a district and as an authorizing entity would be interested in this kind of charter school in our community because we've identified a need. And so you're really in that driver's seat to say what kind of charter schools you would want to see in your community and what you would entertain and that sort of thing. So that's kind of a nice position to be in. Then you also co-negotiate that contract, you monitor the school, and then you decide whether to close or renew it. So that's kind of the core jobs of an authorizer. So that's what like UW System would do. That's what you as a district would do if you were authorizing the school. And then I wanted to point out too that nationally, most charter schools are most authorizers are school districts. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Should I go back?
So kind of just following along in the conversation, as we're talking about authorizers.
Yes.
You kind of, I might have missed a question earlier, but from what Kyle said in response to Jeff, was that earlier question kind of like there's an independent charter school not authorized by the district?
Mm-hmm.
You know, like was there what do you do to? It's not a good school. What
Yeah.
happens? Is
Yeah.
that the kind of
Yeah, like what if that school that's authorized by UW System ends up being really, really bad?
Right.
And then, but there's like, it's not your school. I mean, it's sort of like if there was a Catholic school down the street that you felt like wasn't doing what you want it to be doing, and those kids aren't fully prepared, it's not your,
And then secondly, the next where you just transitioned to was
Yes.
authorizers, and all public school districts are
Mm-hmm.
authorizers. The school district of Beloit could put out a request for proposal and say, or they could establish before they put out a request for proposal, we would authorize charters to be sponsored by the district that meet this criteria.
yeah.
Okay.
Yep. Thank you. So yes, all public school districts can be authorizers. About 100 of them do, actually maybe closer to 90. All public institutions of higher ed in Wisconsin, so the UW System Office, the chancellor of any UW four-year college, the board of each technical college, And then the College of Menominee Nation and the Le Coudray College. Now, of those, LCO is authorizing a school currently, UW Systems authorizing 3 currently, and UW Parkside's authorizing 1, UW Milwaukee's authorizing 15 or so, and no tech colleges.
Are there geographical boundaries to where?
There used to be, but not anymore. Yeah,
College of Menominee Nation could
yes,
authorize a set of contracts to establish school districts.
yeah. So like I met with the Le Coudray board, and they are interested in schools that, you know, kind of cultivate heritage and language and kind of, you know, preservation of culture. And they're also interested in serving underserved kids kind of generally. And so for them, it's not about their geography. They don't need it to be a tribal school or only serving kids of Native American heritage. Like, they're just really interested in doing their part in our education community. You know, and so I think, yeah, and I think I met with a couple of the other 4-year institutions. They're really interested in making sure that the pipeline to those 4-year institutions is looking strong, and that means having high-quality schools with high-quality teachers in all of our rural areas. And so, you know, I think they're just looking, you know, they're just looking to see what is our role and how can we help. So, yeah, no geographic boundaries anymore. And then a couple other non-education public entities are the alders of the city of Milwaukee, and then the county exec in Waukesha. City of Milwaukee has 7, I think, currently, and Waukesha is not active. So, hope that helps. Yes.
Yeah, thanks. Can we go back to your pie chart slide real quick? Okay, cool. So does that include instrumentality and non-instrumentality? Do you have any idea about what the breakdown is and with regard to the 945 local school districts?
Yes. So of those, okay, so I have 2 different answers. So one is that Wisconsin's very unique that we have the instrumentality, non-instrumentality thing. Generally, in the country, if you're a charter school under a school district authorizing, you'd be a non-instrumentality, as we call it. I mean, they don't differentiate because a lot of states don't have the differentiation. So they simply, when you're a charter school under a district, the understanding is that your employees are employees of your governance board, but that you have other relationships with your district in terms of accountability and access to supports and things like that. In Wisconsin, the vast majority of our district authorized schools are actually instrumentalities, which is why I have NACSA on this last slide. NACSA scores Wisconsin really poorly in terms of charter school autonomy because it's harder to have true autonomy for a charter school governance board and maintain that mission and vision of the board when you're tied back to a lot of the things around staffing that go with having your staff employed by the district. So although there's a lot of benefits that I think NACSA doesn't see because they don't live here and they don't live and work in those schools, and I do think that it's possible to have autonomy, but you need to have a really, really strong contract that really understands how those staff find their way into the charter school, and do they have the proper training, and do they share the philosophy of that school. So, I mean, it's just tricky. Like, I use the example of Montessori a lot because to teach in a Montessori school, it's a really intensive 3-year program in addition to a normal teacher prep program. And so you can't just put a veteran teacher in a Montessori classroom and say, okay, we filled that spot, And so, you have to really have that shared commitment to the program of the charter school. And it is possible, but I think that it's just messy enough that it's simpler on a national level to just sort of say, no, don't do that. That's too complicated. Mm-hmm.
Just a quick follow-up. So could you just explain, just so we're all clear on the terminology, the difference
Yeah.
between instrumentality, non-instrumentality, and then just the impact that has on public school funding?
Yeah.
Thank you.
I will try. I've got a couple of slides on this, and this is why Barry's here for backup. So instrumentality means that the staff are employees of the school district, and that it's authorized by the school district. Non-instrumentality means it's authorized by the school district, but the staff are staff of the governance board. So, I mean, that's kind of the only distinction there. In terms of what the contract looks like and what the differences are between an instrumentality and non-instrumentality, and I can kind of get into this more, I've got some other slides, but you have so much choice. I mean, and even in that hiring piece, like I was saying, if the district is really committed to that Montessori program, it can be an instrumentality, but in that contract, it really needs to line by line say exactly how those teachers are going to get onboarded, how they're going to get selected, how we're going to make sure that they maintain the training and all that stuff. And then there's lots of other things that you need to negotiate too. I mean, transportation, physical space, all the financial stuff, you know, who controls professional development, technology, who's doing the lunch program, how is the special ed support defined? I mean, there's just like a lot of those pieces that have to come and be included in that contract. And so this whole instrumentality, non-instrumentality is not a super black and white thing. The only thing that really parses it apart is that staffing piece. But even that, if the staff are employees of the governance board, that's not to say that there couldn't be some shared staff between the district and the governance board. You know, you might buy 0.2% of the reading specialist. They're an employee of the governance board for their charter school role. But I mean, you can maintain a really close relationship. It doesn't have to be this really stark dichotomy. I'll get to funding yet too, but okay. I wanted to pause for a minute because that was a mouthful. Yeah. The district being, like this, the local school district. Mm-hmm. Yeah, UW system. Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes, this is only district authorized. Yes. Okay, so never mind all this for a minute here. Hold on. We'll get back there. This is the one. Barry, you haven't seen this yet. It's pretty. We've been trying to parse through all the different funding stuff, and DPI hasn't given me their total blessing on this, but I've been trying to take like what is a 2-hour lecture from the director of student services at DPI and say, okay, but like how do I tell people for real what this is all about? So essentially there's two halves, right? So there's the district authorized, that's the part I was just talking about a minute ago, instrumentality, non-instrumentality. All we know about that for finance is that the district authorizer and the governance board have to figure out the finances in the contract. So there's no set and, no set standard for what that financial relationship looks like. And I've seen it all over the map. I mean, sometimes charter schools have essentially what any classroom teacher would have over financial autonomy. I mean, they get to decide, yeah, we're going to buy, some iPads because we think that'll help us do this kind of learning model better. And they get, a little bit of wiggle room on, that they want iPads instead of Chromebooks or something. And that's their charter school autonomy. I would say that's fairly weak charter school autonomy. I mean, we tend to kind of push and say, no, the governance board really ought to have control over the whole budget, because technically in that contract, it says that the governance board is financially responsible for making sure that that governance board is, the school is doing what it needs to do. And so, sorry, I'll get to the other half in a minute, but this is important because it can, again, it's totally up to that contract. It can be 100% of the per pupil state and local money is sort of moved to the governance board's oversight. The governance board says, okay, that's great. We want to buy all these services now back from the school district. And we say, we're hiring our teacher. We want to participate in busing, reading specialists, special ed, all the things, the building. And then the district sort of does, they paid the district back for all those things. Whatever's left over is sort of, up to that local school's management. They want to go to a conference or, buy a new curriculum or something. Okay, that's that half. The other half now is kind of what you're potentially talking about. So UW's system is called 2X in our statute. So you're in the like pinkish box, the orangish box there. So 2X schools and new to our authorizers. So perhaps if like UW Stevens Point were to get in the game and start authorizing schools, they would be a new to our authorizer. Anyway, so $8,900 per pupil is allocated directly to the charter schools governance board from the state. This allocation comes from the student's resident district's funding. The resident district receives the remainder of the revenue limit, the difference between the $8,900 and your full revenue limit, which I think we looked up and ended up being like $1,000 above that or so. Yeah, so
Forget the exact amount.
93, okay, so it's like a few hundred, and then this wouldn't be for a couple years from now, so, and this 8,900 is the 2020, fall of 2020 number, they just released it, so then if the school doesn't open for another year after that, it could be, I think it's gone up about $100 each year, but potentially years will change, between now and then too. So that's kind of how that works. So you're not paying the charter school, or, there's not like this financial relationship where you're writing a check to them, but that money is being diverted from your funds coming from the state to that 2X school. Go, yeah. Oh, you've got Mike's email there? Yeah, good. Good.
Sure.
Sure.
Neither Sarah or I understand completely the 2R and 2X funding, and we got some help from Michael Bennett at DPI. And the 2X number in 2019-2020 is that 8,900 number, and it'll go up to 9,165 next year. And your revenue limit in, according to Michael Bennett, in 2019-20, I think, is $9,838. So those 2X students are counted toward your student membership count. Yeah. So that, in effect, those students, if they're residents of your district, if they're residents of Beloit Turner, then they'd be counted in Beloit Turner's membership count. So that adds to your revenue limit authority. And whether you get additional state aid or whether you backfill with property taxes, I suppose depends on how much of your $9,838 in revenue limit authority is state school aid versus property taxes. So it may be, it gives, the money that the 2X school gets comes out of your equalized state school aid, I believe. And, to the extent you have this revenue limit authority, you would be backfilling that with property taxes, to the extent that you chose to do that.
So it's not exactly that they just take, because the state doesn't have the 9,800. You have some of it and they have some of it, but they take 8,900 from Beloit's large pool per how many kids are attending the 2X school, kind of move that over. So it's not like a one-to-one, they take all of that kid's money and just put it here, because it's not divvied up quite that way. But I mean, that's in essence, like when you're thinking about your end totals of, that each kid who's there is 9,800 and each kid who's at the new school is 8,900, that's sort of the difference, of how much money is like following the kid and like how much you get to keep, even though that kid's no longer here. And then as Barry's was saying, you also get to count them in your federal totals, which does sort of help keep you in your size tier, even though you aren't serving those kids. Yes.
So there's 7,000 students in Ocean Board, and 700 of those students go to a 2X. Now there's 6,300.
You're saying the school district still is able to count as having 7,000 students? Okay. And then the revenue limit for the school district of Beloit is 9,800? But the 2X money for every kid for those 700 kids that walked out the door, that 2X school would receive 8,900. The difference between 9,800 and the 8,900, the school district would keep that, the change. Okay. And the 2X school is funded by the $8,900 that came from the students that walked out the door.
Yes, and they don't have the ability to leverage any local taxes or anything,
Oh,
so
and
they're
so the-
totally set on that
So
8,000.
then the school district, to make up for the loss of revenue for the 700 students, through the different mechanisms that they have to adjust expenses needed to operate the district, you're saying the property tax is a tool that they would use to backfill?
They could, or, I mean, potentially if it's that many kids, sometimes that disruption then equals some kind of
Reductions.
reshuffling of
Because that's
buildings and a
You just lost
reduction.
10% of your school district. But not exactly 10% of the funding that comes for
Right.
each kid. Okay.
Right, not exactly. Yeah.
That the funding doesn't go automatically. Is it correct that it goes like in like a 3?
No,
It's like 3 years?
no, we asked Mike about that and
It's a misunderstanding.
no, I think that's old. Like, it used to be different and the 2R stuff is kind of different, but the 2X, no,
So
it,
it's immediately.
when those kids are no longer enrolled here and they're enrolled there, it shows up on DPI's computer where they're enrolled and that's where the money goes. Yeah.
Yeah, so just to clarify, I was at the League of Women Voters presentation when kids first presented, and that was the information they were giving out. So just to be super clear.
I
that's-
emailed to Lisa already
Okay.
saying like, hey, we
Perfect.
just found
That's
this
not
out.
right.
And- Yeah.
Okay, Thanks.
I think that, well, there is a 3-year rolling average in the student membership count that smooths out peaks and valleys in your student count.
That's true. So it does kind of matter
I think that's what, well,
for the big federal counts.
yeah, well, it's, actually, it's a state count.
Oh,
Of,
yeah.
this is a revenue limit issue. And remember that the 2X students who are residents of your district are counted in your membership count anyway. So that 3-year rolling average would make a difference if they weren't counted. Because that would, if you were losing that 700, then it would get smoothed, out over 3 years. But
But if they're geographically located in your district and they pull a bunch of Beloit Turner kids, does the count here then actually go up?
no.
No.
The
Okay.
Beloit Turner kids going to the 2X charter school get counted as Beloit Turner kids.
Oh, that's right, because that's, yeah. Okay, right. Yes. Okay. It always feels weird when we talk about counting kids, and like sometimes I talk about staffing, and I say like 0.2 of this person, and it becomes so, yeah. Anyway, is what it is.
Is there a difference, and maybe this is the next slide you're going to address, a 2X student and a 2R, or are those the authorizers? There's a difference between those. What is 2X and what is 2R? What's the
Yes,
difference?
so it is the difference between 2X and 2R. Actually, let me go back a bit. The funding is different, but I can explain to you what it is better. So it's just when the legislation was passed, and so 2X is the statute where the Office of Educational Opportunity was created. So like if you search in the statute, that's that. So they're authorizing actively. So all of those schools are categorized as 2X in terms of how they're funding, because that was laid out in the statute. But any new to our schools, which are, so the to our schools, right, authorizers right now are UW Milwaukee, City of Milwaukee, and UW Parkside. But if UW Stevens Point decides to start authorizing, even though they were under the 2R statute, they're actually now going to be under the 2X funding formula, right? Yes. Where it's pulled from is different, the amount is the same. So they're both 8,900, and then get this, the tribal colleges are actually formulated differently because of Bureau of Indian Affairs calculations. So, but it all amounts to basically that the school gets around that 8,900 number, but the way it's pulled is different for the tribal colleges, 2X and new 2R, and legacy 2R. 3 different ways, which is why Barry and I are like, yeah.
Yeah, the difference between the 2X and 2R is in part historic, just
Yeah.
in terms of there have been multiple iterations of the charter school law. And it started out with, I think, the University of Wisconsin, Milwaukee, and the Milwaukee City Council and UW Parkside. I think it started with those, and then the other entities were added in later, and then 2X was added later as a statewide entity, although at the same time, the number of UW system schools that could authorize charter schools was expanded to all of them.
So we're talking about money. So if I look at what you said, Sarah, and I'm going to use 9,000 as the number, not 8,900, because it's not
Right,
going to
because it's going to
happen.
go up next year anyway.
So let's say 500 students from Beloit enroll in the charter school that we're not authorizing. That's, my simple mind says that's $4.5 million. Right? So, but the rolling average of 3 years, we won't be hit with the full 500, if I also understand what you're saying.
No, we will.
We
No,
will?
that part, I don't know about
So we
that
would
3-year
take the
thing.
f-
When I talked to DPI, he said, no, the 8,900 goes now.
That's my understanding, that it goes immediately. If 500 kids leave, we lose $4.5 million immediately. But we still get to count them
Yes.
to keep the balance of
Yeah.
whatever our revenue limit is.
Yes.
And that's the only benefit of still counting them.
And then you
And
still
that
get that,
3-year rolling
yeah.
makes it so that we don't lose them all at once in our
I
count.
think the
Right.
3-year rolling
I don't know,
is
yeah.
anything, because you're not having a membership count change.
Only if, well, when they graduate or when they come into 4K, we do. But so the 3-year rolling has to do just like it does with our regular
Oh,
count.
sure, but if a student who is a resident of your district and was attending second grade decides to go to the charter school for third grade, you counted them as a
Still.
student in second grade, and you count them as a student in third
Right.
grade toward your membership count.
They stay on our membership, but we lose that $9,000.
Yeah, well, you lose the $9,000 toward from your state school aid. And you can backfill that with property taxes.
Yeah, but You're asking.
No,
you're-
we can't charge, we can't tax for that.
Oh, no, because the membership count is what determines your revenue limit.
Per kid.
Yeah. and the
But you
kid
still
is
count the
counted
kid.
as your
We count the kid, but we can't tax to make up for that 9,000. That's, no, we cannot. I'm positive on that. I just shouldn't argue with you, but
No, but even if you could, that
We can't.
means,
That'd be a big increase. I mean, and I don't think that, I mean, you're not having those kids in your buildings anymore and you don't, I mean, not that I'm advocating that
Yeah.
you should go lay off a whole bunch of teachers
I've
and
got it in
close
one of my
buildings, but like,
emails.
I mean, if it comes down to the fact that there's 500 fewer kids in your buildings, then the reality is that you're also, you don't have to serve those bodies. And so then, I mean, the money transfer, while it's not ideal for your bottom line, it kind of,
I have it in one of my emails, I'm gonna find
Yeah.
it. You
Find
cannot
it.
tax, you can tax
Yeah.
whatever's above it for the revenue limit, but you can't tax that 9,000. You can't make it up in the property.
No, but you're tempting the school board to raise the future limit
You can't
for,
raise.
yeah, we have the ability to raise that number in the, not based on, the next year we can come back and we can actually suggest that we raise the property tax levy
Oh, levy.
and make it up. So then it falls back on the school board. And when you say that, yeah, we have less expenses, okay, so instead of having 30 kids in a class, I got 26.
Right.
I didn't take away a teacher, I didn't lose anything, so that argument doesn't really
Well, it's
fly.
hard.
If you
Yeah, I
said,
mean,
well, I
you're-
got 500 less kids at one school.
Right.
Okay, but that isn't how it works.
yeah. I
So-
mean, we see it play out in really rural areas where they only have 18 kids per grade period, and then you take some of them and you go, they go over to the charter school. It's like, whoa, wait, whatever. There's only 12 kids in this entire third grade in the entire school district. How do we employ a teacher? And so, I mean, it kind of just pushes the district to have to rethink, be creative, figure out. I mean, okay, now we've got, merged things, or we do some blended stuff in high school, or we, I mean, like, it causes, yes, it will cause disruption if 500 kids leave your school district. I'm not hiding that. I'm not, and I just think, that there's ways to fix it that aren't necessarily that, that,
Well, it does get
Yeah.
passed on to the taxpayer one way or the other. That's what's going to happen if you want to make up the revenue. So I kind of like to, I hope
Yeah.
the audience doesn't hold this against me, but there's a couple of things that confuse me with charter schools.
Yeah.
We talk about full autonomy under the two different ways to do it. And then the other thing is, when a charter school starts up, are they able to say, well, we don't want special education kids, so we're not going to take them?
no.
So are they still then limited to the $8,900?
No, there is a special ed set number that the 2X schools get to. It's like 12,000 or something if the student is coming in with an IEP, or if they get identified with an IEP while they're there.
So they have to follow the same guidelines as public school. That
Absolutely.
says you have to take whoever comes.
Absolutely.
You can't just say, well, I'm taking, if you got a 3.0 or better.
No,
I
no,
think
no.
that some of the
Right.
thing goes around, people think, oh, you'll just cherry pick students, and
Nope.
that's not the case. But can you explain the autonomy and how that actually works? We say, so let's say we sponsored a charter school.
Yep.
Or no, it's a, what is it, non-instrumental, but we still
Yeah.
sponsor it.
Yep, district authorized.
So we're authorized, but then they want full autonomy. What does that
Sure.
look like?
Right. So that's a great conversation. I love that conversation. So it can look like whatever you and the governance board decide it looks like. And so, I mean, that's where the fun of this comes in, is that you're designing it. Like, you get to decide what are the things that we care about. I mean, do we care about raising academics? Do we care about mental health? Do we care about attendance? Do we care about safety? What are the things that we're trying to change? What are our needs? I mean, so I even have in here, like, what we do a lot with districts is we talk about identifying your needs and focusing in on, like, what are those sticky things that just haven't been fixed, and you try over and over and over, but still certain populations are not being served. Certain things are coming in underperforming or over expense, and you are getting to that point of, like, I don't know what to do anymore. Maybe that's where a charter school comes in. If you focus in on one of these things or on something else that really matters in your community, then you get to decide that with the governance board. And like we said, with the application process, you can actually put this call out and say, we as a district want to put more energy into creating a charter school or charter schools that can address this need in our community, or this population, or this ongoing concern. And then you hear what proposals come in and you decide which one you think, or you can actually create one as a district too. And then have a governance board that sort of forms after the fact. But you can say, we want this school created. who's going to help lead it, and then you sort of coalesce that governance board and then create a contract with them. But in either case, you get to then write what that negotiation looks like. And so you get to decide what is the financial autonomy and what's necessary to do the thing that needs to be done. I mean, I'll go back to my Montessori school example. My daughter goes to a Montessori school, so it's kind of an all-day thing for me. But, it's a school where there's a really set there's a set training, there's set materials, there's things that the kids progress through, and they need flexibility over their daily schedule. They need flexibility over their space, over their training and professional development. Other than that, I mean, I think you can kind of take it or leave it, and even what those things look like, I'm looking at evaluation. I mean, some Montessori-trained teachers would say, no, we can't have our kids doing, all the same kind of testing regimen. Well, they are held to the state testing requirements, just like every other public school. So there's only so much give you can have. If you're a public Montessori school, if you become a charter school, then even though a private Montessori school would say, we don't want to do tests, we don't want kids on computers, that's their choice. But if you're a public charter school, then you absolutely have to do those things. And so some things are non-negotiable just by the nature of being a public school. Providing transportation is negotiable. That's something that you guys can decide. Some districts opt to provide busing to their charters, some don't. Lunch is negotiable. They can opt into the federal lunch program or not. Some do, some don't. Curriculum, staffing, not whether or not they do special ed, but how they do special ed. Are they going to utilize the same staff and case managers as the other district schools? Or are they going to have their own? The benefit of having their own is that they might be co-trained. And so in the case of Montessori, it's very important that they also go through the Montessori training in addition to the special ed training so they can stay true to that philosophy. School day could be negotiable. Graduation requirements, other than what the state requires, could be negotiable. Dress code, schedule, ratios, class size, all these things are, that's what you get to decide as an authorizer and as a governance board. Where are the things that you want to explore doing something different in order to achieve different results?
Sarah?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. Well, I just want to jump back to that one point.
Yeah.
We were talking about, can we tax to make up for what we've lost?
Oh, you found it? Yeah.
Yeah, it's in the January of 2019 Wisconsin Legislative Fiscal Bureau paper on charter schools that I got from the DPI. And it says the DPI must reduce the district's general aid payment and categorical aid if necessary in an amount equal to the total of the per pupil payments made for pupils residing in the district. Districts are not allowed to levy to backfill or replace that aid reduction. Yeah, I mean,
They
I
can
imagine we can
raise
still
the-
tax to the max.
Right.
Up to our revenue limit for other reasons, but we can't say, we're taxing you to make up for this. We can't go
Right.
above our revenue limit to do that, so.
Yeah, I
that's a
see
lot.
that
Yeah.
in the Michael Bennett email. What he said is that you receive in 2019-20, 9,838 in revenue limit authority, and DPI transfers 9,811 in 1920, and that would be both revenue limit authority and but you can tax the additional 927.
Yeah, but we can't make up that,
You can't make up the
Yeah.
8,911.
No, but historically, though, we've never taxed to the max.
oh, we have.
Well, not, when I've been in school, we have never taxed the max, I know that. So we were always very proud of that. So you would encourage the school board to tax to the max every year.
You could, yeah.
that's what would happen. I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. I just have been saving up some thoughts and questions, so I'll try to be really brief, though.
Oh, go.
So I just wanted to clarify, since we're talking about funding right now, when I used to work for Blackhawk Tech and I worked with local school districts about, just similar to, you guys are probably familiar with, the collegiate academy thing, right? And we had these conversations with a lot of different superintendents, and what they always said is that with ancillary funding, factoring in, kind of what you were talking about, that they maybe had $2,500 to $3,000 of wiggle room. So when you talk about, $8,900, that's going to cut into ancillary funding, kind of to President Klutz's point about what's the difference, 30 to 25 kids. Having said that, if we were to be an authorizer for a non-instrumentality, right, I saw in your previous slide and on your handout that's up for negotiation. So it wouldn't automatically be like that $8,900.
Oh.
They could take a smaller amount if they chose to, which leads to my next. So the only distinction then, so it's my third point, that's all I got. My third point is the only difference then in a hypothetical situation where as a non-instrumentality, they would agree to a fund or to fund their school in a way that was not debilitating to our district. The difference then would be the teachers would not be unionized essentially, right? Because they'd be employed by the private board and not by the public school. And like, I guess if that were the case, are the teachers who go to work there able ever to form a union? Or like, I guess I'm just wondering like what the logic even is of having non-instrumentality versus instrumentality when in an instrumentality school district situation, we could give full autonomy. I mean, can you speak to
Yeah.
that a little bit?
Yeah, definitely. I'm trying to think if I have a good slide to help, but
Well, while you're looking, I'll just address the union question and the charter school. It is not clear to me if the charter school employees can unionize or not. And I'm certain they can, but it's not clear whether they're private sector or public sector. I think they're public sector. But it would not, they would not be, what's your union, the Beloit Education Association? They
Right,
would
no,
not
it'd
be
be its
Beloit
own.
Education Association. It'd be a separate entity.
yep, and they could also, sometimes when charter schools are non-instrumentalities or independently authorized, they subcontract out. So I brought this slide up. So I say the governance board is, oh dear, hold on, Nick always puts in all these, there we go, okay. So the governance board is in charge of staffing and special ed and all these things when they're an independently authorized entity, but that doesn't mean that the governance board and the people that they directly hire need to fulfill all of those things. They could, just like districts often do, subcontract out to CISA or to other entities for some of those services. So they could hire, a nonprofit CPA to do their finances for them. They're still financially responsible, but it may not mean, and same with their employees. Their employees could actually be employees of a CISA, or employees of another nonprofit, and sometimes that's the case, so that they can have better benefit packages and things like that as being part of a larger entity. And so I just want to sort of bank that in this conversation, but I can go back now and start the answer to your question officially. So. Never mind this slide. I don't think it's going to help us. What I'm thinking is that, so the school would get the $8,900. They need to pay an authorizer fee to their authorizer, which is generally about 3% of your budget, just for doing the oversight and the monitoring and the contract and all that kind of stuff. So there's that. So they're not getting the full $8,900. They also have to employ all their employees, provide insurance, get the building insured. They have to do food, transportation, all the things, curriculum and marketing, special ed, all those big budget items. And, I could pull up my sample budget maybe, but, and so what I find is that the schools that are authorized by a district, whether they're an instrumentality or non-instrumentality, they can negotiate in their contract to buy a lot of those services directly from the school district at a better rate than what they would be buying them elsewhere, or what it would cost them to generate those things on their own, because the district already has an elementary reading specialist. chances are, depending on how big the charter school is, they may not need a full-time reading specialist. They could buy it for $1,000 a day from the CISA as they need it, but that's a higher rate than what the reading specialist is costing the district. So like, I think that there's a lot of those micro negotiations that would make it way financially viable for that charter school to be part of the school district and get everything they need and have all those autonomies at a better rate and even save the district money, because you're losing so much by having them go independent, that you would be able to give them a pretty long leash of autonomies and still come out ahead of having them go with UW system.
So just a quick clarifying question. If I am the entity that wants to create a charter school, and I'm making a decision about, do I want to be an instrumentality of the district or not?
Yes.
What are the costs and benefits? I mean, if the district is willing to give my group full autonomy, what is the incentive to go non-instrumentality?
To maintain that level of control over the staffing. So generally, it comes down to just that, I believe in most of the non-instrumentalities that I'm thinking of, it's primarily that they can maintain control over the training of the employees of their school. So they have these really set models like Montessori or Waldorf, and they just really want to make sure that the teachers share that philosophy and share that training. And their fear would be that if they're in the larger pool and in the union of the whole school district doesn't share that same set of philosophies and training requirements. And so there's just, I think, in other cases, I've found that seems to be the concern.
Couldn't you write that into the charter, though?
You could.
I can,
Go, Barry.
yeah, in the case of an instrumentality, you are the school board, and 11822 and 11824 says that you make the final decision on hiring and terminating professional employees. And that's not negotiable.
Right.
That is simply the law. And so a non-instrumentality school would not be subject to that, even if you authorized it.
So yes, you could write into the contract, and this is what we always tell instrumentalities to do, that a governance board should be participating in the job posting description, the interview process, reviewing applicants, offering, the top 3 candidates, that sort of thing. The district still has to do background checks, has to check licensure, and has to make that final offer. Also, participate in evaluation of that employee, which, is good practice. That's what you want to do for all your employees. However, it just is that sort of like lingering fear that like at any point they could just, even though we've been involved, it's not such a clean break that they would feel like they truly had that control. But then the benefit to being a district authorized school at all, we sort of touched on a minute ago, is that, you as the district, while you're losing that control over the staffing, you're retaining so much by keeping that in your district as opposed to them leaving your district completely. So you are waiving that piece, but you're not waiving the entire school then.
Right.
Sorry, yeah.
So for the charter, the organizers of the charter, it's a matter of control. And if the school district is the authorizer, like you said, to be a non-instrumentality, to not be subject to the agreements that the school district is under, like, or the handbook rules or other things that are established, it's the non-instrumentality is what the charter would be seeking to have their level of independence. But that kind of goes to the other part too, that if people feel like, well, you people already run schools and we don't like the way you run schools, we don't even want you to be our authorizer, that's why people would go outside and not seek to authorize with the district,
Yeah,
possibly. 'Cause
possibly.
To have total autonomy.
Right.
And not, even like you said, there could be sharing, but people's opinion of sharing may be that it's not really a charter, it's really just you doing it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep, no, I think you're totally right. And that sometimes they don't, a charter school authorized by an independent authorizer may have been formed because they wanted to completely bypass the district and have full autonomy over all the things. But it's a lot harder to do, and you come with a lot less services. I mean, you're really building an entire school district at that point. Barry and I were just meeting recently to try to get them, like, I mean, you have board policies, right? Like, and they don't have board policy, and so they need to get all that and write all that and revise all, I mean, so it's like, it's a heavy lift, but it does give you that full autonomy, which I think is the appeal.
I have a question for Mr. Klett or someone else on the school board. In the face of this proposed independent charter school in Beloit, is the school board considering a counter charter school that might be addressing some of the same perceived needs, and in order to head off that effort?
No, Tom. That would really come from the superintendent to talk about what do we want to do. And as you know, we recently had ours resign. So we have not had that conversation as to do we going to do something different. And the group that is talking about doing it really wants to break away. That's my understanding. So no matter what we would do on our end, I think that group is determined to go down that path. So, and I know we've had a charter school here before, and I think we closed it.
Yeah.
And I can't speak to why that happened, but I think as we continue to go, though, I think we have to start to consider more different types of educational processes. And hopefully with the next superintendent, those discussions will take place, and hopefully there'll be community feedback with that as well. So, but as of today, the answer is no. Long answer, wasn't it, for no? But Mike, I do have a question now that I have the mic. Thank you. So if this other group, we did a non-instrumentality, but gave them full autonomy, meaning they want to run it their way, we're not really going to have any say whatsoever, because that's kind of the feeling I'm getting.
No, I don't think that's true. I mean, you're the referee in all of that. You determine all the things and you uphold the other side of the contract. So you agree to any autonomy that's granted. So it's not just like, okay, see ya. I mean, you co-design all the academic, operational, and financial performance measures for that school, and you tell them exactly what you want reported and when you want it reported and what those benchmarks should be. I mean, you control that. It's the same way as if you hire, this is Barry. Do you want to talk about your kitchen contractor?
Well, before he does that, just, so the advantage to the public school doing a non-instrumentality with full autonomy is that those kids still count towards our graduation rate, things like that, correct? We still take credit for them as students in our district.
Yeah. If they're a district authorized non-instrumentality, yeah.
But on the other hand, if the goal is we don't want to do anything that you do, we want to do it our way, there really isn't any full autonomy in their eyes if we're going to authorize it, because we have a right to say things. And what happens if you can't work it out? So what if we authorize it? So you'd almost have to, ahead of time, sit down with any group of people that want to do it, and before you say we're going to authorize it, come to terms, right? Because once you authorize it, if you haven't come to terms, now you got a problem.
Yeah, well,
Well, you would just not sign a contract.
yeah. Technically,
Okay.
that authorization is a multi-step process where if you were to authorize this non-instrumentality charter school, the group comes to the board, we have this idea, are you willing to enter into negotiations to charter this school, to authorize it? And you make that decision, yes, we're willing to do it, no, we're not willing to do it, and that starts the negotiation of the contract. And then after that, you work out the details. And I think one thing that you should keep in mind, we keep talking about how the charter school, this school wants to have total autonomy. There's no escaping the need to enter into a contract with somebody, either you as a school board or the Office of Educational Opportunity. And if you authorize the school, you're going to put performance measures into the contract. And if the Office of Educational Opportunity authorizes a charter school, they're going to put performance measures into the contract. And that charter school is going to have to answer for why they don't meet them or not meet them. Now, as Sarah suggested, as a bathroom contractor, not a kitchen contractor, I don't tell my contractor how to do it, but I told the contractor what I wanted, and the contractor is accountable for that.
But the only way to be 100% autonomous is to be an independent charter school.
Well, you're
Because-
still not 100%.
Yeah.
because-
Well, I mean, you have
But I mean,
accountability, but I mean,
closer.
you
Yeah.
don't have anyone telling you how to do it or who to hire or any, I mean, if we were to be the authorizers, even if they were a non-instrumentality, we would still be having to write the paychecks and do the hiring.
Oh, no. If they're a non-instrumentality, then.
I'm sorry,
please.
instrumentality, I meant to
Yeah.
say, I misspoke.
Yeah.
Right.
So if they were an instrumentality, they could be completely autonomous except for that part about employment.
I mean, and accountability, but
Right.
yes, I mean, they could determine their curriculum, their class sizes. I mean, but also you're holding them accountable to a budget. So like, they
Right.
can't, like be building castles out of gold. Like, you set up what it's going to look like, but they have a lot of say over curriculum and schedule and things like that. I mean, so you absolutely could have an instrumentality of your district where, wait, which one were we doing? Non-instrumentality?
Well, I was comparing the
Yes,
instrumentality.
okay. So
to-
like, but I mean, the autonomies could be that you have a charter school in your school district that operates on a different calendar and different school day hours. But they could still be part of your, I mean, like there's little things like that. I say that's little. Yes, there's tons of logistical things you'd have to figure out and who's paying for the extra hours and the extra heating expenses and stuff like that. But if that's what they decide is valuable, and that's what they need in order to accomplish their goals, and that's where they want to put their energy, then that's a negotiation. To me, I said, I gave that up when I was in a school district. I said, no, we were an environmental school. I wanted the kids out in the woods all summer. But when it came down to like, oh my gosh, like then we have to keep the building open and figure out our own transportation and our own food and and it just became Sarah's pipe dream instead of something that could actually be accomplished within the confines of our charter contract. And so we said, never mind, we'll figure it out. And so that's like a concession that the design team would make because of the realities of, partnering. So I mean.
I found out the amount too of our revenue limit. It's $98.38 per kid.
Mm-hmm.
So we would be keeping about $900,
Yeah.
and all the rest of it would go to the
Mm-hmm.
charter school.
I mean, it'll change a little because it's 2
Right.
years in the future.
Each year it goes
and-
up. What goes to the
Yeah,
charter school?
theirs will go up, yours may or may not go up a little, so yeah, but I mean, that's a good ballpark for
Yeah.
now.
Sarah, let me ask you a question. So because really, I think we're talking non-instrumentality in reality for what's going on in this town.
You mean independent?
No, if we authorize it, our
If you
non-instrumentality,
authorize-
gave them full autonomy.
Oh,
What I'm saying is, the group will still want to
Yeah.
have their terms met, but they still have to, no matter if it's us or somebody else, they still have to get the authority from whoever authorizes them to do it. But talking about the finances, then, do charter schools then are able to use private financing as well to offset costs? Kind of like a public-private school combination. They're taking public money and then they're pumping in their own money to pay people more money, for example, to teach, saying, or are they really
No.
limited to that budget that they've got, and they've got to stay within that budget?
Yeah, I mean, yes and no. It's sort of like in Minong, Wisconsin, Jack's Link's Beef Jerky Factory is there, and they built this really beautiful aquatic center that the school takes advantage of because it's all free. And so, and that's not charter, I mean, that's just everybody.
And
And
every charter school, so if they
Well,
want,
it's,
they're going
you
to
know-
build their own school with their own money, I'm assuming. But to run on a day-to-day basis, they've got the $800.
right.
And are they then allowed to subsidize it with private dollars on top of that?
I've never seen a
I don't know
charter.
that, I'm asking.
I think
No,
the
I
answer
mean-
is yes.
So the governance board can collect any kind of fundraising or donations, and they do that all the time. You know, they have pizza sales to take the kids camping and stuff like that. I mean, so you're talking about a bigger scale and infringing on like salaries and stuff. I mean, yeah, I guess if they're a non-instrumentality.
We wouldn't turn away any money someone.
No, if somebody wants to build you a pool, you say yeah. I mean, so
Right.
yeah, I think, yeah.
Put your money in the hat on the way out.
All right, Barry, you had something on that too. Thank you, yeah.
It's on YouTube if you want to watch the rest.
No, actually, I wasn't going to add anything
Yeah.
that you hadn't said. You know, charter schools fundraise all the time.
Right.
And you may have a unique circumstance where this particular charter school has substantially more capacity to fundraise than perhaps some others.
So following along with President Kletz's question about the instrumentality, non-instrumentality, I think in general, any charter school will have an authorizer.
Yeah.
If the authorizer is the district, then that means the district will have to enter into some negotiation with the entity that they're choosing to authorize. And there'll be a contract established that, you know, how much autonomy from 100%, you know, except for in those spaces, like I said, the leash will be as long as whatever is negotiated. In certain cases, do charter schools in their cycle, like you have a 1 to 5 year cycle,
Yeah.
do they seek different authorizers? They may start out as an independent charter and then say, they're 5 years running, look at what we're doing. Would the district like to become our authorizer? So it could go either
Yeah.
way.
It could go either way. Yeah, oh, sorry. It could go either way. You can change authorizers. And I would say it's not super common, but actually the UW system authorizing office from the start, they've been very clear that that's actually their hope, is not to build a large portfolio of schools, but to sort of jumpstart innovation and do some of the risk-taking in partnership with school districts and sort of say, you know, the district doesn't feel like it is in a place to do this charter school right now, so they sort of come in and will help, and they, you know, one of their conversations that they talk about along the way is, you know, have you worked with your district? Have you approached your district? What, you know, what's going on? So that then at some point, yes, like after the next renewal, they could hand off a high-functioning school back to the district if the district was interested.
So in general, I mean, summarize what you're saying, that the UW authorizer, it's not really their intent to establish a system of charter schools all across.
Right.
They're just like an incubator.
Yeah.
And hopefully they're hoping that something will get started and pass off. Are you aware of any current districts in the state that have said, as a district, this is not something we want to take on? Why don't you take that to the UW authorizer, get that going, and when you've got it, if you want to come back in, that's
I
possible.
mean, they're really new, but actually, yes, on Tuesday, I was just at a meeting where a district has some elementary charter schools, but they're at capacity, and so they want a high school, but they want it in partnership with their local university so that the kids are more likely to get comfortable with the university. So they're actually a district that has 3 other charter schools, so they're very comfortable as an authorizer, and they said, actually, go ahead, governance board, and go negotiate with the university, because we just feel like that's a better fit for this school and for what they're looking for. So yes, as of Tuesday, I can say yes. But in terms of the schools that they're already authorizing, they're only like 2 years old. And so I think there's been some preliminary conversations, but not, yeah. Yeah.
Is it possible for a charter school that's been authorized through a non-public school district to, after they get well-established and they're functioning well, to change from a charter school to a voucher school? So they
Yeah.
can do that at any time?
Yeah, I've seen a bunch of well, I shouldn't say a bunch. I've seen schools change all sorts of different ways. I mean, one of the UW system schools used to be a private school. One of UW Milwaukee's schools, I believe, or maybe it was MPS, decided to become a voucher school. I'm working with a private school right now that's sort of trying to decide if they want to be a voucher school. Oh, and then I have another voucher school that used to be private and now wants to go the extra step and be charter. So, I mean, yeah, like, I think you just really, like, continuously need to weigh the pros and cons in your community and decide, okay, who are we serving? Like the one that was private said, okay, we're serving kind of this higher SES. They became voucher, now they're serving the high SES and the low SES, but they're not reaching any of the middle kids in their community, so that's why they felt like they really wanted to be charter, to kind of help them fund a more equitable, wide range. So, I mean, I think I don't know enough about charters. You guys have, or I mean not about I don't know enough about charters. That is true. Barry and I are always learning. I don't know a ton about vouchers, but we're learning, and I think, we're all learning together. So.
Yeah, a voucher school is a private school. So, if a charter school wanted to become a voucher school, it would first become a private school, and then it would take the steps to qualify for taking voucher students.
It would probably be a 1-year gap in there where they would have to be a private school, sort of establishing itself as a private school, because you apply to be in the voucher program like mid-year as a private school, and so you couldn't really make that turn in an instant. You'd have to, like you said, Barry, it's more progressional.
So just to clarify, if a community group wants to start a charter school and they wanted to reach out first to the school district, they would go to the full school board, since the school board would be the authorizer?
The school board is the authorizer, and your board policy would, in theory, state what your application process looks like. Barry and I have been working on that with a lot of districts. Not all districts have a charter school policy in place, but we help with that. And so, you would say something to the effect of that you accept rolling applications, or every March you have an RFP that goes out that states, and that's what MPS does, they say this is exactly what we're looking for, here's the application you'd fill out. I didn't bring enough for everybody, but we have like template applications, and we have template PowerPoints that go with it, so that then they could come do a committee or a board presentation. The design team would come and say, here's what we're doing, here's the need we're hoping to fulfill, here's what we imagine, here's what we'd ask of the board, our timeline, that sort of thing. And then you would take a vote if it's something that you'd approve or deny, or approve with revisions. Maybe you would go back to them and say, we like what you're thinking, but here's what we'd want. And so it's really kind of a partnership, or it can be. And other ones happen, over coffee and a handshake. It's just really it kind of varies. And I think, I've seen them in all kinds of ways. But yes, ideally, did I kind of explain the policy and process?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, like you said, probably more than half of the school boards that authorize charter schools do not have a policy. I
Right.
believe you do have a policy, although it's been around for a few.
Oh, yeah, I was kind of,
And of the schools that I looked at, MPS, Milwaukee Public Schools, probably had the most developed process. Of course, they have the most charter schools.
Right.
And they have an office, they have a subcommittee of the board. It's not a board committee, it's a body created by the board that has board members and others on it that does the review and makes the recommendation to the board. They have a pretty developed process. And, but in other school districts, it is literally the people that have the idea for the charter school come to a school board meeting and talk to the board. And you could choose to do it either way.
Okay, yeah, I just was curious because we just have never had that kind of presentation before. And so if there were a possibility for an instrumentality or a non-instrumentality, that might be like the logical, transparent starting point, would be for that group to come to a school board meeting, something that's like open to the public
Yeah.
kind of thing. Okay, cool, just to clarify, thank you.
Yeah, and you can drive that. You can say it would be at the March meeting, and you have 20 minutes, and here are the 5 things that we'd want you to present on, and you have to submit your materials a week beforehand in order to be on the agenda, stuff like that. I mean, so it's like, you really get to decide what those presentations are, and then you determine when you would get back to them and where to go from there, and, yeah.
Thanks, I have to pick up my kids, so I'm going to go, but this has been really helpful, thank you.
Good. Some of them, yeah. Good. Well, we've been kind of jumping all over. I have the timeline, and I'll share these slides with Pam, and then would you have a way to share them, if other people, okay.
So it's fine if whoever
Sorry, if someone from the public would like to see these, it's fine to share, right?
Yeah, they're
Okay.
all,
Great.
everything that's on here, and, I should go to my last slide at some point here.
We have until 7.
Oh, okay,
so-
okay, good. Well, I'll just say quick, in case anybody else has to go. Our website is at the bottom of all the slides, works.org, and we have a whole different host of ways to share resources. We have e-courses, we have a YouTube channel, we have a whole Google folder full of all these documents that I shared today. Everything's free and open, you just grab it. We've got webinars posted, and then we also do a ton of just one-on-one phone calls and consulting. So if anybody has questions, or if you want us to come back and talk again, Barry's available as one of our consultants too. And so, we're just really here to help and make sure that we either have or can find the answers that you're looking for. And that's my email and phone up there as well. I'm happy to take calls whenever. Good, but yeah, I have a few more things I can share. I just didn't want to miss
Sure, we
the
have until
opportunity to, yeah. Are there more questions at the moment? Okay. Whew. I don't know, I feel like we've kind of touched on a lot of these things. Here's my lingering question.
Oh, I have a question, maybe, and this is, I think, important to people.
Yeah,
Extracurriculars,
yeah.
AP classes, there's no kind of law that says that we have to allow an independent charter school to participate in those, correct?
Right, yes,
Okay.
and you and I, it took me like 13 emails to get to the bottom of that, but yeah, you were right in it. So, and Barry, you're maybe better at articulating this than me, but if it's a private school, the district has some obligations,
Homeschool, I thought.
or homeschool.
It's homeschool, yeah. There is a part-time open enrollment statute, and that allows students to apply to go to schools in a non-resident district. So it's kind of like full-time open enrollment, but just for 1 or 2 classes. And it was recently expanded, and as Sarah said, it covers homeschool students. It doesn't cover private school. I have no idea if it covers independent 2X
No.
charter school.
No, it doesn't.
That's what
It doesn't.
I emailed with Mike about, and
Yeah.
it doesn't, because they're their own public school. You can enter into a co-op through WIAA if you want, so like, just like you could between two
Well, you
small
shifted
districts.
over to the extracurricular.
Yes,
from-
okay,
You'd have
sorry,
to-
so
yeah.
courses, though.
Yeah, I was thinking of the AP courses, which I think is a part-time open enrollment question.
And I don't know if you can be in one, if you could be in a charter school and then say, we're going to part-time open enroll into the school district.
I don't know that you could either.
I don't think you can do that.
We have people, what do you?
Part-time open enroll out to Turner then,
Yes.
right? So I could have my kid in a charter school and then open.
Yeah, and I think technically,
Can?
you can full-time open enroll in Beloit Turner and then part-time open enroll back.
I didn't know you could do that.
I think you can do that.
I've never heard of a kid doing that.
Well, it
I mean,
probably, yeah.
It probably hasn't, but it, yeah.
Well, that kind of question, we're talking about not extracurricular activities, but courses. Because the students themselves are residents of the district.
Right.
And so I know like in the past, well, when there was Beloit Catholic,
Yeah.
students went to Beloit Catholic, and because they were residents of the district, those that were residents of the district, they still had rights to take courses in Beloit, like at the high school.
Yes.
Now, extracurricular activities, I know that's
Yeah.
sports and other things, but the students, the 700 students that may leave, they are resident district. They are resident. Some of them may be resident students.
Yes. It's just possible that it's different because they're in a public school versus in a private school. So we need a 15th email to Mike Bormet, I think, to get to the bottom of that, Pam. But I mean, I hear you. I just don't know, because you're right. Like it wouldn't be open enrollment at all because you are a resident. But just like the Catholic kids would come back for up to 2 courses or something while maintaining, I mean, is it the same as like between Appleton East High School and Appleton North High School? Like the kids could opt to go take a welding course at Appleton North if Appleton East doesn't?
That would be a local district policy.
I
Oh,
actually
because
found
they're-
it here on the DPI website. It says that a pupil enrolled in a public school in the high school grades, so it specifies high school
Yeah.
grades, may attend public school in a non-resident school district to take a course offered by a non-resident school district. A pupil may attend no more than 2 courses at any time in a non-resident school district. So high school, it says, and it's public to public. I don't think
But that's
Catholic
different
school-
because they're both resident school, like it's all the same resident school district. If they're a Beloit kid in a Beloit,
Well, it says non-resident. Yeah, so I
but
don't
they're
know if.
still a resident.
That would be going to Turner.
That'd be going to
Right.
Turner, but if they just want to go to,
Public school.
right,
So you're a public school, so I'm going from
Right.
public school to another.
but you're not, like, the resident language in what Pam just read doesn't apply.
Yeah, so you can't go to the Beloit School District, right? No.
You could, yeah. Yeah, but that, I mean, that might be true.
See if I can figure it out.
Yeah.
I don't know that.
And we'll do some digging, and like I said, I don't know that that's,
But what I wanted to really make clear here in this
Yeah.
presentation that you're giving is that there's no law that says we have to let any child
Right.
from the charter school come in and participate in our extracurriculars, jazz band, sports,
Right.
or it doesn't look like even AP classes, because that's what you and I found out.
I think that's what we found out.
Okay, but we can,
But you can,
right,
and you can charge for it.
okay.
Or you can just create a cooperative agreement or whatever. I mean, like we often see in our rural areas, like 2 little districts co-op for football. And the way that WIA works, you co-op per activity. So you don't necessarily have to be like completely co-opt. You can just say, oh, like we've got enough kids who want to play football with the other team, and the other team is in a position where they actually would benefit by having that co-op, then you can decide, yeah. Or you can charge or whatever, yeah.
So just to kind of clarify the non-instrument versus the instrument.
Yeah.
So for extracurricular sports, if it's an instrumentality charter, I would assume they have the right to play football for our school, be in drama.
Well, actually, not necessarily. As part of your school district, yes, but think about it in just like Appleton has Appleton North and Appleton East, they get to decide because they have 2 school codes. they can decide, do they have 2 football teams or they co-opt? And so as a district, if they were an instrumentality or non-instrumentality of your district, not talking about the UW stuff, but like you would decide for each activity if you wanted those extracurriculars to be co-opted with WIA or not.
Could
Okay,
be
so-
part of your agreement.
So it doesn't matter if it's instrumentality or non-instrumentality, we'd still have the authority, if we so desired, to do that? Okay.
Well, yeah.
I'm thinking they have the right.
They have the right. They
Yeah.
have the right. I mean, because they are part of, they fall under WIAA. I mean,
They're
they're their
part
own
of the
school
district.
code, they're part of the district. But it's just, it's going to decide based on how big they are and what kinds of activities you're talking about. Like, does it make sense to have 2 soccer teams, you know, if you don't have enough kids? And, you know, that's just stuff you'll have to figure out if they're part of your district. And then you'd have the option to figure out if they're not part of your district. Speaking of being part of your district, here's the last thing I'll leave you with. I've kind of alluded to this earlier, but, you know, as you're deciding if a charter makes sense in your community, we often talk about need, and, you know, what asset would it bring? You know, I don't want to just make it all about the one that's on the table at this time, because just long-term, I mean, you may decide that there's a totally different kind of charter, a different purpose, and a different reason that you'd want to do this. And so I just wanted to highlight some of the things that we see around the state, that these are like the 6 kind of buckets of identified need that we see in communities, and why then they create a charter school. And we have a much longer document that sort of gives examples in each of these buckets of how that's played out. So like, for instance, family and student choice. You know, if you go to somewhere that doesn't have access to any private schools or voucher schools, open enrollment's not a great option because of geographic distance, and your only option is the option. You know, that's hard on staff and families and kids when they feel like it's not meeting their needs. And so, you know, just creating another option can be just such a huge asset to a community, especially a more isolated community or a community that doesn't have other options. And so we've seen that play out and just really work wonderfully for, you know, so that it doesn't, you're not forcing every single kid into the same round hole, like, you know, like you, yeah. And so that's the family and student choice. Community connection. Sometimes we leverage things in our community and create partnerships with nature centers and things like that. Financial sustainability, you know, sometimes open enrollment or virtual enrollments are really detrimental to communities, and so they see having a charter school as a way to retain kids who are otherwise finding other options. And so, you know, if you know that a large percentage of your kids are opting into a virtual charter school, and more are, you know, are leaving your community, are open enrolling, are moving to the suburbs, or, you know, going to voucher schools or private schools, having charter schools in your district keeps the kids in your district and gives them those choices that they're looking for without having to go to those other options. And that's really worked, you know, in a lot of places. The whole autonomy, accountability thing we kind of hit on earlier, meeting the needs of all learners. You know, when you're doing your needs assessment and looking at your district data, who are those populations that you're not hitting year after year? And could having a different educational model help those kids be more successful? And then an innovation center, you know, there's all kinds of reasons you would do that, but we, you know, schools as a whole haven't changed a whole lot for, you know, like a good 100 years. And so, you know, innovation just for the sake of being more relevant and moving faster towards change, I think, you know, has its own inherent value. So there's lots of reasons that we see schools charter, and like I said, I have one handout about it, but we also have a much larger document, if you're interested, that kind of gives examples of each of those, so you can really kind of imagine what it would be like. Yeah, lots more stuff, but we've
Sarah,
been talking
can
in
I-
circles, so.
Can I ask you one more?
Absolutely.
I found this on the DPI website, on that same brochure about part-time open enrollment. It says, can private school pupils and pupils in home-based education programs participate in part-time open enrollment? No. The inter-district part-time open enrollment program requires a pupil be enrolled in a public school in the high school grades. So homeschool and private school, they can't. But I would think that with this charter that's being proposed, they could, because they are basically in a public, other district, right, school.
They are their own LEA, yeah.
Yeah, so I think that they probably could open enroll part-time. And
Well-
then the question would be, do we have to give our own kids priority over space in the class? And I would imagine we do.
Well, in part-time open enrollment, you can give residents priority over non-residents.
But if they are a resident.
Yeah.
They're resident from another district, though. It's really complicated, huh? It's
Right.
not in our district.
Geographically, though, they live in your
Right.
district.
It's so,
But you know what they do all the time with virtual schools? Sorry, I got away from my microphone. A lot of times this happens with virtual schools, and so I think I know who I want to call at DPI. I think I'll call Nico, and he'll help me figure this out, because kids open enroll out to their virtual school and then back into their resident district part-time for that very reason. So they open enroll into a different district, so like McFarland has a really big virtual school, a lot of kids open enroll out into McFarland, but then they really want to stay in band, so they open enroll part-time back into their district so that they get to continue to do that one course.
okay. And then before we end, I just want to summarize really briefly that we have a proposed charter school coming
Yeah.
to Beloit that will be a public but independent charter school, 2X.
Yes, if
Okay.
they get approved
Right.
and contracted.
Not a non-instrumentality, not an instrumentality,
Correct.
but an independent
Correct.
2X charter school. And every child that goes, we will have deducted approximately $9,000 from our school for each child. Right. And it looks like they can probably open enroll, but they will not be necessarily mandatory to let them participate in extracurriculars. So that kind of sums up a lot of the questions people.
I don't think you have to let them participate in that.
No, but you could.
You could choose.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Well, no, actually, you probably, to do that, you would probably have to work that out with the WIA.
Right, a
Right.
co-op.
A co-op.
And, but like the jazz band, that would just be an agreement if we wanted to do that. And, okay, so it is considered a public school located in Beloit, but not a part of Beloit School District.
Right, not part of your report card or anything like that. I mean, the only thing I would say is that we don't know for sure that they're they haven't gotten through their application phases yet. And even if they get through the application phases, they haven't entered into a contract yet. And so, we don't know for sure that it's happening. But also, if you do, as a board, think that there's value in reaching back out to them at some point, either now or in 5 years from now, that wouldn't what you just described wouldn't necessarily have to be.
Right. It
The
could
status of
become
things.
a Beloit school in the future if all parties wanted to.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So I have a question that's maybe a little complicated. I don't know if I can ask it clear enough, but if the independent charter does go through all the process and get accomplished and established, do they have to follow any of the rules in terms of, like, we as a district only enroll our own students in the resident district boundaries? If they, let's just say, they build within our city limits and our district boundaries, but a student from South Beloit, which is in Illinois, wants to come, are they then going to be charging them like tuition like we would and things like that because they're not a resident of the district?
So if they're a Wisconsin district, they would, they just sign up for the lot, they apply through the charter lottery, they get accepted, they get admitted, and then the 8,900 actually comes from that district to the 2X school. So that kid of the 500 kids or whatever wouldn't affect you at all. If they are an Illinois kid, they go through the tuition agreement, yeah.
Okay.
But they'd still have to go through the lottery. I mean, getting into the charter school has its own lottery process too.
Okay.
Did we do it? All right. You
Yeah.
probably need a break before our next thing, so.
Well, thank you very much,
Thank you.
Sarah. Thank you, Barry.
Yeah, we appreciate it.
Great.
And all the help you've been for me up until this point.
Yeah, well,
Really
I'm still
appreciate it.
here. Barry too. I mean, really, just anybody call us anytime.
Thank you so much.
Hopefully your
Yeah, my
heaters in your
shirt-
car work on the way home.
Okay. Oh, and I should.
Take a 2-minute break. We can start with the Michaels, but I need a 2-minute break.
Okay. Thank you, Barry.
And that back.
Okay.
probably don't. We should.
Are we ready technology-wise? Huh? We're not gonna, we don't need it?
All right, thank you.
All right, let's put the Michaels and Michaels show on. All right, so welcome, Michael and Michael. You don't have to sit so far away. You're gonna go over there?
Yeah, well, if you sit next to,
So basically,
wait a minute, should he sit up here so he has a mic?
yeah, it doesn't matter where you sit. We're not gonna be on, so
You want to just sit here where there's a microphone or stay there?
Well, either, you can,
it doesn't matter. Do you have a presentation you're doing?
I've got just a little explanation and to go through my process.
Sure.
And the documents I put in front of you,
Okay.
and to go from there. I didn't know how in-depth on expulsion law you wanted me to get into or anything like that.
Tony, is that portable microphone available for?
I just gave it back to Dean,
Oh,
He can,
We
we'll
can share.
be fine. So, you know, part of it's process, but part of it's also the frustration we've had at our level of the lack of, this will sound bad, expulsions that have come before us. One of the biggest complaints in the district has been the lack of discipline, and that isn't really on you, but we're kind of at a loss as to where this district's at, and we're dealing with that on a separate issue. So we're just kind of looking for your process as to what you go through, because I don't think we always get the full story, and you're just kind of the guys in between.
Sure.
What comes to you to come to us.
Sure.
So go ahead.
So I'll just start from the beginning, and the process begins obviously with conduct at school by a student. And when that occurs, obviously from an administrative standpoint, inside any of the particular buildings, whether it be an elementary school, intermediate school, high school, BLA, and even if someone has something that needs to come from Beloit Virtual School, which isn't unheard of this year, that conduct happens, a discipline referral gets entered by the administrator. If the conduct is severe enough and they choose to make that a 5-day suspension typically, and request an administrative hearing with me, that's the first that I get. The administrator will fill out a request for administrative hearing. That will get emailed to me, typically and hopefully on the day that the conduct occurs, because then that starts my process. My process begins with getting that administrative hearing scheduled. By state law, we can suspend a student for 5 days. And so we need to have that administrative hearing that I would conduct within those 5 days. And so depending on my schedule and district schedule and the availability of rooms within the district, we want to get that scheduled right away so that we can go through that process. And so all the information that I get prior to that administrative hearing is typically what the code of conduct violation was. And so this was a violation of number 307, fighting. And then it'll give me a paragraph-long blurb that student A and the student that's being sent to me were engaged in a verbal altercation, and then a fight ensued, took staff to break it up. And that's the information that I get. That's the long and short that I have about that. So in front of you, I've put just kind of some sample documents where I've obviously removed names, changed information about what the family sees and what gets sent out. And so that first document is just the notice that my office would send out. The first two documents, actually, and they're only slightly different. But the first two documents is that notice of administrative hearing. And so we're sending it to parent John Doe regarding student Jane Doe, her date of birth, her birth date, her age, the school that she's at, the grade she's in. Dear Mr. Doe, there's a hearing scheduled to discuss Jane Doe's conduct of fighting. Jane should attend. And that second sentence in the second paragraph is really what my job is at the meeting, I will determine whether the student should return to school. And so in every meeting, I tell them that I've basically got three options. One, I can send you back to where you came from. So in this case with Jane Doe, it's send you back to Memorial. Two, find an alternative educational program within the district, or 3, if the conduct warrants it, consider further disciplinary action, which would be expulsion, which is where Mr. Holland gets involved.
Mr. Olich, can I ask you a quick clarification? You are acting sort of as a school administrator more than as a school board member. You're not there representing the board, you're representing the school district.
Correct. Because the role that I serve in other districts or may be just served by the actual administrator who, writes the student up for the discipline referral and does that. And in other districts, the administrator may make the decision that, well, this fight deserves to go to an expulsion hearing. They may be the one at the outset to say that this needs to go there.
So in our case, in our district, we have one consistent person that makes that decision. and that's
Correct.
you.
And that's been my understanding of the role. And just for a little bit of background, and I probably should have given you it, I've been doing this now this is my 14th month. I started in January of last year when Lori Medina resigned, whatever, and have been doing it ever since. And so all of the hearings that get to Mike Holland, from whatever building they are within the district, come through me first, and I say yay or nay, this should be expulsion or shouldn't be, based on the facts and circumstances, recommendation from administration and all that. So there's the theory behind this position is that there's one consistent voice throughout all the students in the district as to how the discipline proceeds beyond that initial suspension.
Okay, thank you.
So that's the letter. And then the second letter is identical, but you would notice at the top, after grade 9, it says OHI. That could be OHI, EBD, LD. That identifies a student who has a IEP or a disability. And so there's a third paragraph in that letter that says, prior to my hearing, there would be a manifestation determination review. And so the IEP team would meet to discuss whether or not the conduct that resulted in the discipline referral is related to their disability. And if it is a manifestation of their disability, my hearing then gets canceled, and the IEP team deals with what to do, how to make revisions to the IEP team to serve the needs of that student. And so those are the two sort of different routes that those initial letters take shape. So after those go out, we hold the hearing. We hold the hearing here at COLAC in the executive hearing room just behind us. At the hearing, the administrator from the building and hopefully parents and student appear. We go through a packet of information that is substantially similar to the expulsion recommendation packets that you folks receive when a student does get expelled. Go through that start to finish, just like you see on the videos that we do during expulsion hearings. At the end of that, I always give, as does Mr. Holland in expulsion hearings, give the family and the student a chance to interact. I would say the administrative hearings are a little less formal than the expulsion hearings. I state at the top of every hearing that, we're just 4 or 5 people sitting around a table. If you've got questions about any of the information that's being presented, if you've got questions about, or if you think something's wrong in here and you want to talk about it, let me know, because up to that point, the only information I have about the student's history, is typically what's in the request for the administrative hearing, which is often very brief. And so that oftentimes there's a lot of discussion at those hearings about what went on prior to, and a lot of times parents and students alike will raise issues that I wouldn't have known about, and I think a lot of times administrators learn to a certain extent at the hearing about other issues that are going on with the student and with the family. So after all that's said and done, the very last page of those recommendations, which are also the last pages in the expulsion packets, is a recommendation from administration. And that recommendation from administration is typically, again, one of 3 things. Return them to school, typically with a behavior contract or some sort of modified plan to make sure that the conduct that brought them to the hearing doesn't happen again. Or if it does happen again, that we've got a clear path forward on what the discipline at that time will be. 2, to recommend the alternative placement typically, like in the case of Jane Doe here, with an alternative placement at the high school level is most frequently Beloit Learning Academy. Depending on the student's academic level, where they are credit-wise, it could also be Beloit Virtual School, where they do online courses. Or 3, then go down the expulsion route. So in front of you are 2 different results of administrative hearings. I believe the one that is first is where, in lieu of proceeding to an expulsion hearing, and so we basically make an agreement with the parent who doesn't want to see their child expelled, that in lieu of going to expulsion, you're going to agree, and we're all sitting around this table going to agree to alternatively place them in Jane Doe's case here, at Beloit Learning Academy for the remainder of this year. And I give Principal Gex's contact information. The process then to start that transfer from, in this case, Memorial to BLA, is to contact her, set a intake meeting, and get the student a schedule. And she's just transferring buildings within the school. The discipline referrals and everything follows her. And so if she were to have another fight at Beloit Learning Academy, when that student could come back to me after another fight, in theory, I would be able to still review the entire discipline history for that student for the entire year. Secondly, and in a lot of cases, I will recommend some sort of, and it's on the top of the second page on that first results, recommend some sort of individual counseling. As you see with all the expulsions that come before you, I recommend that in nearly every case. And I find that it's entirely appropriate with the majority of students who come before us, that I am a big believer in individual counseling and think that, students and youth going through schools today face more challenges than I faced in school, face more challenges than you folks faced in school. And having someone outside of family, school, wherever, to talk to and help them work through those situations, especially for the students that I see, who are students who are in significant discipline issues, that's a good thing. And so it's a recommendation almost always, and it's always a recommendation when it comes to expulsion. So the second set is the same letter except with an expulsion recommendation. And then you've seen those recommendations before. If you've got any questions about why we do anything or why I draft those recommendations the way that I do, or my thoughts on any of that, I'm happy to talk through any of that. But that's substantially similar. After that, along with the results letter, if we are going to an expulsion, that last document that I've provided you is their notice of the expulsion hearing. This is a document that we have to send by law to provide them their legal written notice of the expulsion. Has to be mailed out to them at least 5 days prior to the date of the expulsion. And by sending this notice of expulsion, we can extend that suspension from 5 days to 15 days total. And so what's often happens in trying to work the schedule and get everything done is that we do schedule it on that 10th day following the end of their 5-day suspension, so that we can make sure that everybody has time, the letters get out, and that proper notice is provided. The form of the notice of expulsion letter contains a lot of what is statutorily required to be in a notice of expulsion hearing. And so this is a form letter where we just plug in the names of the student and things like that. So,
Mr. Olich, are they allowed to keep up with schoolwork during that 10 to 15 days?
They can. A lot of times they ask at the end of the administrative hearing, what about my schoolwork? And if they're going to an expulsion hearing, they're typically not going back to their traditional school setting. And so what will often happen, and what's typically paragraph 5 of my recommendations, is what educational services are we going to provide during the expulsion? And a lot of times that's BLA's after-school program. In some cases, that's Beloit Virtual School. And so what we tell them is that they can contact Principal Gex regarding either the after-school program or the virtual school pending the expulsion hearing as well, and get started in that as well. They would, in theory, be entitled to continue working with their teachers at, let's say, at Memorial during that pending 10-day. However, if it's close to the end of a term, that makes a lot of sense. But if it's 2 weeks into the term and 2 more weeks waiting on the expulsion hearing is just going to make it 4 weeks into the term and then they're going to be expelled, well, they're not going to receive any credit for that work anyway. And so often it's not, doesn't make a lot of sense to continue work on that during that waiting period.
Tony, I think we have to leave the door open for open session. We're open, so I don't think we can technically close the door.
No, you're good.
So I have a question for you.
Sure.
And this is, you and I spoke on the phone, and you told me a little bit about how it works, but just to make it really clear in my mind, you are our consistent administrator, so to speak,
Yep.
that's attending these hearings and making these decisions. But do you take advice from others? So in other words, does that consistency kind of become irrelevant by you taking advice from other administrators in various buildings about how to handle things?
I guess, what do you mean by taking advice?
Well,
If
do
I
they
listen to their
say-
recommendation.
You do,
Yeah,
okay.
absolutely. I mean, they make a recommendation, and I'll ask for, I don't know if support's the right word, but why are they making that recommendation? And typically, that becomes pretty evident throughout the course of the hearing as to, this student, and I'll take kind of a generic example, but one that I've seen pop up fairly frequently, is this student's got, let's just say, 15 discipline referrals at Memorial. They're a freshman. It's been a really rough first semester. We're now into second semester. They earned 0 credits at first semester. And so I see that not only did they have a really rough time academically, they had a rough time with their behavior because of all the referrals, and they may not be serious referrals. They may be a handful of tardies. They may be, just some minor disrespect, some 100 and lower 200 level things. But then they've got obviously probably a big 300 level referral that brings it to a hearing with me. If there is a recommendation to, just send that student, like, it's not working, he just needs to be expelled. Well, I like to probe that a little more and say, well, why? Number one, what have we done to, fix the problems that this student has had for the first semester? Is it solved by an alternative placement within the district? Do their testing scores and testing results show that they're capable of completing online schooling? And is that better for them because all of these interpersonal conflicts are negatively affecting their education and things like that? So regardless of what the referral is or the recommendation is, I would say that there's typically a dialogue between myself and the administrators probing to figure out if that is the best case. Oftentimes it is, because I think administrators know their students the best, but then in the back of my mind as well, administrator 1 and 2 from Memorial may do this, but 3 and 4 never do this. And that's where it comes to me to say, well, I understand what you're saying, but I've been doing it this way. And then we have a conversation about why that may or may not work with this particular student. And so ultimately, I am the one that's in charge of the consistency, which is a big responsibility and something that I take very seriously. But I do take their advice or their recommendation because they're the ones that know the student as well. So it's.
And especially when neither the parent nor the child appear, either at the administrative hearing or the expulsion hearing, we almost have to rely on, to some extent, on the recommendation of the administrator because we have nothing else to go by. If the student isn't there, we can't question. If the parent's not there, we can't discuss anything with them either.
I think, Michael, and we talked about a little bit last time, where the frustration I hear from the community and from staff is inconsistencies. And I think, Pam, you were trying to get at that a little bit, and your question is that, is there, in your hearings, are you saying that certain people are very lax as far as leaning, so, well, we don't want to do anything? Because there seems to be this message out there, and I've talked with the interim superintendent on it, that there's confusion within our principals that, one, we don't want referrals, which has never been the case. And at the same time, are we sending kids to hearings with administrators, some saying, really, here's the facts, and some saying, well, really, Kyle's not a bad kid, got 25 referrals, and if we just keep giving him more chances, I think it'll be okay. That's the frustration on our end, and why we actually asked you tonight, is that from what you're seeing from the principals that come before you, is there consistency in how they look at things and how they actually present things? Because we're not seeing it, and what I hear in the school is, it ain't happening.
Sure, and I would say the easy answer to that is no, in that I don't see consistency among every principal within the district bringing me the same things. And so I think part of my frustration with consistency as well, and I brought this up with when Pam and I spoke, is, and you referenced just, well, there was this incident at this school, and why didn't this ever happen? I said, well, I never saw that incident. And so there may be something that goes on at one of the intermediate schools, or even that it's one of the APs at Memorial's responsibility that something happens and they've got a different way of dealing with that in-house, that it never gets to an administrative hearing. And so there may be a different administrator, though, that takes a nearly identical situation and brings it to an administrative hearing. And not only brings it to an administrative hearing, may recommend expulsion or may recommend, a different level of punishment. And so I pride myself, and I try and be as consistent as I can possibly be with everything that comes before me. But from what I hear as well, and I think is that there are situations in different buildings that don't all make it to me, but they do make it to me from some other buildings. Does that make sense?
You're actually echoing what we fear is happening in this district, which leads to loss of professional in our organization, and it leads to loss of students going somewhere else. The lady tonight said, I'm really struggling with keeping my kid in the Beloit school system because of the way we take care of our kids, and or not taking care of our kids and not having a learning environment. So that whole intent tonight is not to put you on the spot, but just what are you actually getting?
Sure.
Is it consistent? Because if it's not consistent, which I'm kind of hearing you say,
well,
then no wonder our staff and our students are confused as to what is acceptable behavior.
And I would say and not to backtrack on a previous answer, because I do, from what I hear, I don't believe it is consistent from administrator to administrator. But again, that's all what I hear, because I don't know what happens in a handful of buildings because I never get referrals from them. And maybe that's, and not never, but there's certain buildings, there's certain administrators that refer a lot more than others do. And so is that because they have a tougher group of students, a tougher caseload or whatnot? I don't know the answer to that, but I guess I find it hard to believe that one administrator could send me 30 referrals and the other one 2, with a similar size group.
Yeah.
So there's 2 opportunities here for the inconsistencies. The first one is, do they go to an administrative hearing or not? I mean, do they get a referral or not, really? And then do they go to administrative hearing or not? And if so, various administrators, once they go to administrative hearing, will go for expulsion, and some will not want to recommend expulsion. So there's really 2 different times when there can be all these inconsistencies that we're hearing about, whether or not to send them and what to do with them once they get there.
Correct. And it's my job to hopefully make that second inconsistency less of an inconsistency or not one at all. And I think the thing that I've learned now that I've been here, I haven't been here a complete school year front to back, but I've been here a second semester last year and a first semester this year. And the difference I've noticed is that in a first semester, and in the first handful of referrals, first 20 referrals, 30 referrals even, I've noticed that I think the desire to be more lenient because it's early in the school year, the desire to give a second chance at the beginning of a school year is a lot greater as the year goes on, and those 5 referrals that I see in October become 15 and 20 referrals in December and January. The recommendations are different, and maybe deservedly so, but I think the direction or what do we want to do, if it is 5 referrals and it's conduct of these 5 referrals in September, but it's these 20 referrals in January, how do we want them handled? And I think that's a question for administrators as much as anybody.
I think one of the issues, because I've been doing I've been doing this, for longer. I've been doing it for 12 to 15 years. And over that time, administrators have changed. And I'm hoping that we get out from under the situation where an administrator, in order to reduce the numbers of expulsions or even administrative hearings, wouldn't let some of those come to a hearing because they wanted numbers to be lower. I mean, I heard that from the community, and I experienced it, personally. So I hope we're past that it's not coming down from the top, that they don't want those numbers. Because the numbers...
Yeah, Michael, there seems to be within our district confusion on that. I had a recent conversation with one of our superintendents, and the question was, how can you only have 10 referrals at this time of the year? Well, we heard the board doesn't want to have referrals. Well, the board never said that, and I know for a fact that the past administrator who's no longer here made it very clear to staff, I don't want referrals.
Right.
And that has carried over. Now, that isn't anything to do with you two,
No,
but...
that happens before.
But in my conversations with you, Michael, that we've had that discussion several times, that things seem to be being suppressed. And I've made that known to both Sue and Bill, that, and we're looking at the code of conduct, that it really needs to be enforced. When I talked to the BEA, the only thing they said is, we need administration to be consistent, that the principals know that we are not going to tolerate bad behavior. Again, that's not your issue, but the issue that we're looking at is stuff actually getting to you. And when it does, is it consistent that for a kid that's doing the same thing, is a recommendation consistent across the board? I get their circumstances sometimes. I get that. And we're not looking to expel kids. At the same time, though, if we're not having those chances to look at what's going on, the behavior in the school becomes, it's acceptable. Oh, I misbehave, I get a bag of potato chips. I get to go back to class and disrupt it one more time. Now I get a chocolate candy bar. And again, not yours, but...
No, and kids pick up on that very quickly.
But I'm surprised at the lack of expulsions that we've seen, and we're very fair. If we think it's not expellable, we have said, no, we're not going to go with this. We are going to, and you've been either modified or say, no, we're not going to expel that person, based upon the data that we have. But it really, we should be seeing more than one expulsion every 2 months in a school of 7,000 kids. And that's the frustration part. Because I'm hearing the behavior in the schools is not very good, and I'll throw it out there, especially like at Fruzen, it's horrible, and we allow it to happen, and we lose kids from Fruzen to go to Clinton and Turner, and it never ends, and our mantra is, referrals are down. Look at us, referrals are down. But so are kids in our class, so are teachers that used to renew their contracts. So you're hearing my frustration, I apologize, but I needed to hear from you. Kyle, go ahead, what you're seeing on your end.
I also want to throw a disclaimer out for anybody who's watching on YouTube at home to avoid any emails or anything later, that no, we don't think every student should be expelled. We're not looking for expulsions to go up. We want to expel the students who need to be expelled. And we also recognize that there are systems and supports lacking in our district for other students. And so this is like a multi-prong approach. It's a very complicated thing. So please don't email later. Just throwing that out there.
If you do, email Kyle.
But
We don't want kids expelled, but we do want our schools in order.
Exactly. Right.
And we're tired of it. We're completely fed up with hearing about the discipline problems, with hearing people say, this is going on in the schools, and we're not seeing it come to the board. And so that's why I called you and said, can you please enlighten me how this process happens? And when I realized that you're really acting as an administrator and that Mike Holland is acting as the board, well then we should have a really good situation here where you as the administrator know what the board wants and maybe realize these other administrators may or may not be recommending what the board would like to see happen in this case. I mean, that's up to you, but you know that we want discipline back in our schools. We want order back in our classrooms. And then, Mike, you know, too, that, we don't want to expel for a reason that's not expellable. But like I say, we've got to do something. And we've never had a meeting like this before because we've never felt so frustrated before with the whole
And
situation.
I can give you some figures. I think it was like maybe 5 years ago. Prior to that time, while I was doing this, we had approximately 60 to 65 expulsions each year. Okay, when things changed, it fell down to 12. So, and the students' behavior did not change, but I think it was at the administration level, they were discouraged from making referrals. And so obviously if they're not making referrals, there aren't going to be expulsion hearings. So, and kids immediately learn what they can get away with and still stay in school. And so over time that has, but I guess the most drastic thing is going from, 60, 65 to 12.
But it does correlate, Michael, with loss of students.
Right.
And loss of
Right.
professional teachers that say, I'm not going to work in this environment. And to say there's no correlation is putting our heads in the sand.
Right.
And so I'm confident moving forward. I've talked with Bill and Sue. They're on board. They're out evaluating things now, and I think the board has sent a strong message. I know that Mr. Wong's looking at the code of conduct, and we have those discussions going forward. And again, we're not looking to punish people, but we're looking to make sure our schools are a safe learning environment. And key is a learning environment, not just a place to go sit or cause confusion. And knowing that with you two, we've got the right thing in place on the backside to make sure we're making the right recommendations that comes to the board so that we have the information that we need. We just need to make sure the information you're getting is consistent across the board. And not every school is the same. I get it. There's different makeups. But basically, if kids know what the behavior that is expected, and if you get outside of that line, there's a consequence for that. And that's the message that the board really wants to go back to administration loud and clear. And hopefully you'll see, actually, you should see less. Overall, if the schools actually enforce the discipline and classroom behavior, kids will get it pretty quick. I can't do that anymore. And so we'll always have fights in school. I get it. Hormones. I mean, I was a high school kid a long time ago, and every school in America does. And those things happen. But we just, I think, are in a bad spot right now, and we need to change that. But I appreciate you guys coming in to talk about what you're seeing, because again, I really don't want you to see a lot, but I want it to be consistent, knowing that you're not seeing a lot because of the right reasons.
And on that same point, and this was one thing that Pam and I talked about, one thing that I think would be really good going forward, not only for the board, but for administration and the district as a whole, in setting that expectation annually at the beginning of every year, in having a meeting with the board, with administrators, APs, and principals, to just express this. Have a meeting in August where we're all invited, and to lay that out to, not necessarily a full code of conduct review, but just that, this is what is expected, so that, and this is the process, so that consistency comes to me, so that I can apply consistency on my end, and we can all do that going forward. I think a meeting where we all get on the same page, because one way or another, there will be a change in administration, either at APs or principals, every summer. I think that's, with a district your size, that's probably unlikely when it doesn't change, at least with a principal here or there. And so, I mean, just having that reinforcement meeting is something that I would certainly welcome. I'd be happy to be at, be happy to present my process, and how, when I get those requests, what does a good one look like? What does a bad one look like? What information do I need? Because there's a number of times, too, that my legal assistant needs to go back to administrators and say, well, what about this piece of information? It's not filled out. And so just little things like that too that would make the process flow so much better.
I love that idea, to have us all on the same page, everyone in the same room at the same meeting, and you hear from the board what the board expects, and the principals hear, and then they hear, from you what they need to be sure to do, and all of that. I think that's a great idea.
Yeah, I know that, for example, I'll shout, Aldridge I've heard very good things about Aldridge. What they did at the beginning of the year was they met with their staff and met with the kids, and they said, these are the expectations. And I actually had a person tell me, some of the kids said, well, we got to do that at the other school, but, well, you're not at the other school anymore. And this is the expectations. And the kids learn it, that's the expectation. But they had that meeting with staff and with students saying, we are going to enforce the code of conduct. And so our message, again, was, and I think with Bill and Sue, we'll get down that path, and whoever the next superintendent is, will make sure that message gets across. But I like your idea, get you guys involved up front, and let's have that discussion at the beginning of the year, not have this discussion at the end of the year.
And I'll just make one comment if I can about Aldrich. They have a very defined and set process that I know Principal Vrydock sticks to and expects his staff and assistants to stick to as well, where there's, a tiered process. And so I feel that it's, if something raises to the level to get to me from Aldrich, they've been through a process prior to get to me. And just on a consistency basis, I know that doesn't happen at all the intermediate schools. I'm not trying to comment on that, good or bad, but there's inconsistency between Aldrich and Cunningham and McNeil and Fruzen as far as how they handle that process. And so then different things come to me from Cunningham than would from Aldrich, just by the way that their administration is set up within their buildings. So that's where the inconsistencies on my end, I certainly see.
I have a question about your process. So you are there as the administrator. You go into when you decide you want to recommend expulsion, you go into the meeting with Mike Holland. Why is the other administrator in there?
So I'm going to steal Mike's analogy, and he told me that I couldn't, but I think of it,
I was just going to give this.
You didn't want to talk, Michael, anyway,
Yeah.
so.
So the good way to look at it, I think, is if you and I almost hate to do this just because I don't want to make it out into a criminal proceeding, but
It's parallel.
it parallels really well. As the expulsion officer, Mike is the judge. As the administrator in that route, I am what the prosecutor would be in that, the witness or the building administrator brings evidence to me, or you could call them the witness or the police officer in a criminal proceeding, brings evidence to me. I decide whether to prosecute it or how to defer it or whatnot. And so then at the expulsion hearing, it's our trial. So me as the prosecutor calls the building administrator as the witness to present our facts to the judge. And so I think that's why that's the reason for the other administrator. We take sworn testimony to take proven facts from the administrator, because I couldn't give those because I wasn't there.
Now, does it matter whether or not the administrator was part of the incident? So let's say a child attacked the principal. That principal shouldn't be the one in that room with you, right?
I don't know that we've had that specifically, but no. I don't think it matters because the principal is the voice for that building in that situation. So the principal, and a lot of times as you look through incident reports and whatnot, they're drafted by staff or dean of students or APs, and yet the principal is the one there reporting on their behalf. And so the expectation is that they've been made fully up to speed and they could state everything as accurately as the individual who wrote the report. At least that's my expectation.
And if I understand what you're saying, you're looking at that situation where we're at the police or, whoever's present at the incident, the fight or whatever occurs. And it's up to that, at that level, to determine whether it comes to the district attorney or whatever, prosecutor. So it's at that administrative level where the first decision is made. And I think that's where you're seeing inconsistency. It's not with Michael, or it's not by the time it gets to the expulsion.
Well, I mean, it could be at both levels, because the first one is, do we send him for an
Right.
administrative hearing?
The
But then the next one
teacher
is,
and the administrator.
yeah, but then the next one is, once Mike gets it, okay, I'm hearing the opinion and taking possible recommendation of Administrator X on this, where if it was Administrator Y, it might be totally different. So I'm just wondering, can we count on you to say, but this isn't what the board wants?
I believe you can, and I believe that I do. And if there's anything that comes before you that you don't, I'm happy to have a more in-depth conversation when we actually look at the code of conduct and actually look at specific discipline referrals. And, I know the document that you sent me, Pam, I would warn against, and I think DPI and everyone else would warn against a true zero tolerance type policy. But, even more specific guidance from you rather than, we trust you to make the good decision. And I trust myself to make the good decision, and I think so far that I have. And it's not a rubber stamp from me on what the administration recommends.
Okay, that's good to hear.
I had, and just by way of example, I was here all day today. I had 11 hearings today, and I accepted 8 of 11 recommendations. And I would say that those 8 were fairly no-brainers, but 3 of them I did disagree with the administration on. And so I don't know, is 30% high or low? It's probably pretty close to the ballpark, but I would say maybe 20% might be closer. One every handful, I would say it's not, I'm making some change too.
And have you disagreed in both directions in the past? Like, they say don't expel, and you say, no, we should, or vice versa? They say expel, and you say, no, we probably shouldn't?
I believe I have. I
Okay.
don't have that in front of me right now, but, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
And then when it does come to an expulsion, if the parent-child are not present, I'm limited to the information contained in that recommendation pamphlet that you get. I can't look outside of that. I have to make my decision based on that. And then you have to either modify, reject, or affirm based on that information. You can't look outside that. And the problem that we had in the past, which has now been rectified, was that sometimes, I don't know how, we had too many people in the closed session room, and I talked to DPI about that a couple of years ago, and they said that you're really interfering with due process, because a parent and child are never at that closed hearing. If you're taking information from other people, the attorney that I talked to at that time for DPI said he would object to every order that we issued, because even if nobody else said anything, the possibility of those people saying something would violate due process and they could get the order thrown out. So now where only the board is present and I'm present, we've sort of remedied that issue, which is a good move.
Yeah, thank you for clearing that up. We are doing it correctly now.
Yes.
With just the board and with you.
Yes.
Anything else? Appreciate it. Thank you for coming in on a nice cold night.
Yeah.
It's going to get colder.
I've been here all day.
Yeah, well, wait till you go outside then.
Thank you
All
very
right.
much.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, happy to do this anytime.
Well, hopefully we'll do it in August.
And that would be great.
And
Yeah.
another thing, if we're going to do that, and this goes back to the teacher administrator level, when they do their report, sometimes they give, and like I say, I'm limited to what they've got in that pamphlet, if they're not present. If we could get them to more state facts than opinions. Sometimes if you read those, it's, I felt that this student or whatever. I need facts. It's sort of the who, where, when type of thing, where their opinion shouldn't be included in that initial report.
You're talking about the administrator's opinions or the teachers where they write comments?
Both.
Both?
Both.
Okay.
Yeah, whoever's writing the initial referral,
Right.
basically.
And I don't know if that's ever been done either, meet with those people.
Training
Or to
on that.
give them a guideline.
Yeah. Yeah, I can see we can be doing a lot better with the whole process than we are. So this has been valuable. Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so we are at future items for discussion, if you have any. Michelle, you can write it down. You and I have already talked, so I've already given Michelle what I want in the next, and we're pretty full already now. But is there anything else that you guys want to have addressed? I have asked that the ad hoc committees come to conclusion before I get off the board. I will tell you that.
Possibly with the Hispanic one on the next meeting?
If it will be quick,
Fairly.
we can put it on the board meeting, right, the main board meeting on the 25th for ad hoc.
For
She
the
wants to
ad
bring her
hoc.
ad hoc committee proposal forward at the 25th meeting.
At the 25th.
We've got room on that one.
Huh? With the recommendation?
Yeah, we've got time in the main meeting, we don't on the special meeting. Special meeting's booked.
For ad hoc.
Yeah, based on what we, yeah. I believe so.
Would love to, thank you. Other than that, motion to adjourn? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Anybody want to stay later?
No.
Thank you, everyone.